All right. What's up, everybody? All right. So we are going to do our next iteration of our book club. We are reading our book, Why Do I Do What I Don't Want to Do? And we're in chapter 3 tonight, Greed and Generosity. I think it'll be good. It'll be a good discussion. Maybe one that you might struggle with, you might not. You might not know that you struggle with it, but it was just some good, interesting reading this week about it, and so I'm excited to get into it with the guys. We're one guy short because our guy Corey, our bud Corey, had their kid today. Him and his wife, well, his wife, not today. I guess it was yesterday, but his wife did the hard work, and he just sat there. Hopefully, didn't pass out, but he might jump into chat at some point. We'll see if he's awake at the hospital. So, huge congratulations to Corey and his wife and their new baby girl. So super exciting. But we do have the other two guys with us. Eric and Brandon are going to hop on as we jump into our newest week of this book. So let's get them in and we'll get going. All right. All right. What's up, gentlemen? All right. Okay. All right. So we've been talking about these different vices that we have. In the first week, we talked about pride and humility. And then last week, we talked about anger and forgiveness. And tonight's was or this week's was a bit different, talking about greed and generosity. Now, if you just looked at the title, would you have said before you started, oh, I'm a greedy person or not? Yeah, okay. That's totally fine. That's what I would have said too. Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I know y'all don't know each other very well, but I know both of y'all pretty well. And the way that the author Jonathan Pokluda describes himself and like how he chased after the next dollar. I At least I have known Brandon since he was in high school, so I know his career path. That's not ever been his case in any way. It doesn't mean you don't try and make go up in business and make good moves for your family and for you, but that's he hasn't done it to chase the dollar. There's been opportunities or whatever, and he hasn't done it to chase the dollar. And Eric, from what I know of you, that is not who you are either. And so I probably was the same way. I've heard Jonathan's testimony, the JP's the author's testimony before on a podcast. That's how I found out about the book. So I knew this part of it, and so I wouldn't have said that. Now, after reading it, would you say that maybe you do have some tendencies for greed that maybe you wouldn't have put yourself in like your struggle with greed category, but now you go, okay, no, but I can see how there's some tendencies within me that could struggle with greed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. What about you, Brandon? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. All right. All right. Well, let's jump in because I would say I definitely in there, and I made some marks in some of the different spots. But what uh, what was something that might have stood out for you guys? I'm trying to get to the right page. I turned back too far. So the first part of it, he's just kind of telling his story, and then he goes into this section. We care a lot about money, um, and Jesus did too. One of the things that kind of stood out to you, and again, I know so as a pastor, we don't talk about money all the time. And there's a reason for that is because the pastors that you see talk about money all the time are the Benny Hinn's or what's the crazy guy with the eyes that like looks at you and it just like looks crazy. I don't know, but he got I think arrested recently or got in trouble for some tax evasion stuff. And anyways, there are pastors that are known in whole like not necessarily denominations, but whole like segments of I'm gonna air quote it Christianity, where these people are just seeking money, right? They're selling things and they're selling towels and sweats and all these like marketing things just to try and get you to give them money. And so as a pastor, the fear is that you don't want to even be close to being associated with somebody like that So instead, we don't talk about money a ton because we don't want people to think that's all that we're about. But Jesus talked about it a ton. So, did anything stick out to you guys in that section about Jesus talking about money? Uh huh. Uh huh. Yeah.
I definitely fall in that stressful category. I definitely agree with those stats.
Yeah. No, I
Mhm.
totally agree. I think that in the premarital counseling I do, and in just even in my own marriage of 15 years, that is the number one stress. When he talked about how millennials are at like 83%. I think we're all, I don't know, Eric may be younger, but I know at least two of us are millennials. And, uh, and so like it is, that is huge that 83% of millennials stress about money at some point. So
What year does a millennial start?
I think actually a millennial starts in like 84, 85,
Yeah, I
82.
think I'm
It
right on the
depends.
line.
So
Yeah,
I think we're on the beginning of millennials. So technically you would
yeah.
be in there no matter what. We're like almost Gen X, but we're
Mm.
falling to the millennial. I definitely categorize myself as a millennial based on the characteristics of what a millennial is. That's me through and through. So what about you, Brandon? What stood out to you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the same thing, and definitely agree with the stats. I mean, stress is always, money is always a cause of stress. Um, yeah, the other part was just a reminder, like the fact that the love of money is, or what does he say? It's the love of money. It's not. Um, it comes down to the condition of the heart.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not the fact that you desire to have money to sustain yourself and your family. It's the when it becomes the priority.
Yeah. No, that's really good. So on page 70 says, "Why do we so badly desire something that Jesus so sternly warned us against desiring?" And I think it's a good question. Is this why do we need money? Like what about money makes you go, "Oh, if I had more, then I could what?" Like what is that need? And again, it might be an air quote need, more of a want, but what is the draw for you about money?
For
Go
me,
ahead.
it's not the desire to have excess money. It's the financial freedom part that I always try to gain, but that's difficult to get to as well. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's just it's not that I want everything and anything, but I don't want it to be cause of stress. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah. So just that freedom from being out from under the weight. I think that's what I felt before is that weight
Yeah,
of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
I
that
think
makes sense.
I'm not one to go out and buy the nicest house and car and all that stuff. I just want to be to the point like I have a savings or something. Like if something
Yeah.
bad happens, then I can cover it and not have to stress I'm gonna pay it off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Type
Hmm.
thing, which is I think most Americans these days.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's really good. I would say for me, it is definitely some of it's the safety. Some of it for me is just wants. Like I want something and I don't want to have to think about, oh, I really shouldn't get that because I need to save that money for something else. It's nice um, when my wife went back to work full time and we suddenly had the second income in our house, it was nice to be able to go for the first year before we, moved houses or whatever. That we was just like, we want to go out to eat. Let's go out to eat. I don't care. Like we're fine. We got an extra influx of money every month that we hadn't had before. We hadn't been living with that, and it was suddenly this like, oh, okay, this is kind of nice. This is really nice. I don't have to think about it. So that safety, but then also that want of just like I want to go do this. I'm gonna go do it because brings me pleasure. Whatever. I think the other thing for me is there's definitely a level of pride in comparison with money, and not in a and I think Brandon, it kind of goes back to what you said earlier. it's not in a jealousy like, oh, I need the bigger house, or oh, I need
Mhm.
the nicer things, or the whatever, right? It's that there's this level of I want to feel successful, and I want to feel valued, and I want to know that if I'm comparing myself to somebody else, it's like, oh well, they're making this. Like there's just that level. Sometimes that plays
Yeah.
into it for me. Is there's a sense of pride to go, yeah, like I'm finally at a point in my career that I make this much money. There's a sense of pride in that as well.
Mm. Yeah, I think for me, I probably put in, uh, not the appropriate amount of weight into that validation that I feel like money would bring. Because kind of like what you're saying, I feel like if I get to that next level or that next level, like, okay, that validates my career success and
Yeah,
progression of my career path and all that kind of stuff. So I probably put way too much weight into that aspect of it to validate or know whether or not I can be proud of what I've done
yeah.
professionally.
I mean, that's a really good way to say that. That it's not necessarily about the paycheck. It's about that it validates where you are in your life. And I think that
Mm.
again, Brandon and I are almost 40. Eric, how old are you? 36.
36.
So 36. You're getting there pretty quick too. Um, but
Thanks.
I found more and more I'm thinking about that over the last couple of years is that where
Mm.
am I at in my trajectory, and where am I going to go? Like I'm almost 40. Like I should be
Mm.
an adult I feel like I should finally be an adult with the amount of money that I make and the amount of and the the whatever kind of fills in those blanks. So that's a really good thought.
Mm.
All right, anything else from that little section?
Yeah, yeah. Well, just one last thing I had was the fact that he counted up. I've never counted up, the parables that Jesus told, and he
Mm.
pointed out that roughly 25% of what Jesus talked about was money and wealth, which is interesting.
Which is crazy considering that we don't talk about it hardly ever in churches. And when we do, we're careful. And again, I'm a pastor, right? So I get this. But when we do, we're careful on how we say it and how we talk about it because we're just so afraid to come across. Jesus wasn't afraid. Jesus talked about it. And Jesus talked about it boldly and openly and honestly. And we get into generosity. We'll talk about ways that we can be generous. Um, because that's ultimately what Jesus wanted, right? Was this desire. It kind of says at the very end of this section that chasing after greed and materialism isn't anything new that's just happened in the Western culture, the Industrial Revolution, or whatever. And it's been time and time all throughout Scripture that this was a struggle for mankind all along. So we get in this next thing, this next section. He talks about the curse of wealth, ultimately trying to show that just because you have money doesn't mean that life will be easy or that you will be happier. In fact, it's often the opposite. That when you get that money, especially if you aren't prepared for it, that it actually is almost like a curse to you than it is beneficial. So I guess the question I have is, have you guys ever dreamed about winning the lottery? And what have you dreamed about doing with that
Haven't
money? Because I
given it
okay.
all away, of
Oh
course.
yeah, whatever. That's a bold faced lie. Um, like what's the in then I was like, what's the first things you would do with that money?
Pay
I
off
mean,
debt.
Yep, amen.
debt. We got to be careful with the family. You want to help the family,
Uh huh. Uh huh. Uh huh.
then you get
Would
family
you?
coming out of the woodworks.
Listen, I'm glad y'all
Mm.
said give to your
uh,
church. I appreciate that
yeah,
right
yeah.
off the bat.
That was my next one, John.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Yeah, number three,
Expectations.
number four down there. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
Church, definitely.
what uh oh shoot, I had something else. I don't remember what I was gonna say about it. But have you ever gone and bought a lottery ticket?
Mm.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I have too. Like, I'm not gonna tell you that I haven't. I've been to Choctaw, I've been to Vegas. Like, I've been. It's its own thing. But and there's part of me that definitely wants to win that, obviously, and you get excited. You definitely dream about it periodically to go. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if a family member in their will left me $500,000 or just some extreme. I mean, I would take $500, but let's just some extreme amount of number. But so, what are some things? Because I've got some things that stood out to me in this. But what are some things that stood out to you guys in this section?
Just that first verse on page 72 from Ecclesiastes. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. I wouldn't say I love money, but sometimes I struggle with being satisfied with what I'm bringing in.
Yeah. Yeah, this is where to me it started to get a bit personal, which I really, probably didn't appreciate as much. Is I don't feel like I am greedy, but yet at the same time, Solomon's saying whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. There's a level of that too, right? That that's definitely part of it. For me, that was like, oh, I have thought that before. I've said that before. I've, you know,
Mhm.
that's been a part of the process, and there is some rootedness in that is greed, that isn't content with what God has given. So that's really good, Eric.
Along with that, though, I feel the same way. I struggle with the thought of what the balance is of trying to put our family in a position where we're financially comfortable, but then also not having that turn into a love of money and not
Mhm.
having enough. 'Cause same as you, I've had those thoughts of I wouldn't consider myself greedy, but I do have the thoughts of I don't feel like I make enough. I don't
Right,
feel like it's enough.
right,
So thinking through those, what he's talking about and how I look at that is that is that really actually rooted in greed? Although I don't feel like I'm trying to ask for a lot, but I'm just with inflation and all that kind of stuff, I don't feel like it is enough. So it's
right.
how do you find that balance?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's that contentment. Um, it's to me that's what it's rooted in is not even necessarily contentment. Sometimes it's just trust. I think it goes back and forth that when I find myself struggling with the fear of is it enough? Is it enough?
Mm,
There's some reality to the fact of I have to do what's best for my family, right? I mean, if um, our church is behind in budget, if we take staff cuts next year financially, then like I'm already thinking now, like what is my response to that, right? Because I don't want to just sit there and be afraid, um, but I want to be prepared, right? So there's just there's a level of that's good, but then on the other side, sometimes I think that it's being content with what we have, and when we're not content with
mm,
what we have, it's kind of like you said before, like not that that envy of sometimes
mm,
envious of what other people have. Sometimes that spurs up, and then other times I think it's a lack of trust that God will provide enough, and I think that's probably where the three of us probably struggle more is
yeah.
okay, God, things keep going up, and I don't know how we can keep doing it
Mm,
because I'm kind of at my wits' end of it. So, which is really good.
yeah.
And we'll talk about
That's
that with
true.
generosity. But
Yeah.
for me, one thing that stood out was on page 73. He says, at the very top, he says, when we love money, enough doesn't exist, which is really interesting. But what he said actually next was and I highlighted this and kind of marked it down because I think this is summary of the entire book for me is when we feed a desire for wealth, it grows. But what I wrote next to it was when we feed any of these vices, our desire for them grows. And what a good illustration for this entire book is that um, they talk about the last thing you want to do with the cat that comes up to your door or any animal, wild animal or whatever, is to feed it, right? Because they're going to keep coming back for more and for more and for more. And that the same thing with these vices. When we struggle with greed, when we struggle with temptation or with anger or with pride or with lust, like we'll talk about next week, we struggle with these things when we feed into that, right? So we fall into that vice. It just makes us crave it even more and more and more. And I don't know if you've seen that in your own life, but I know that I certainly have in mine is this desire of going, oh, well, I did it once. I fell into that once, or I desired that once. Now I seem to want to do it again and again and again,
Mm.
and it's harder to kind of reset your brain and your heart. So is that something y'all have seen in your own
I would
lives?
say yeah. With what we talked about, I think it was last week, we were talking about anger. I could definitely, when I was reading that's what stuck to my mind is whenever I'm in a situation where I get angry, I feel like I'm much easier to continue to get angry, or maybe it'll
Hmm.
simmer down and then something tiny will happen and boom, I'm back to being angry again.
Yeah,
I think that was one thing that stuck out to me.
that's really good. Yeah. How about you, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I highlighted that section too.
Yeah.
Um, Definitely, like you said, a summary of the book, and any of these vices, you feed them, you linger on them, and they can eat you up. So
Yeah. That's really good. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we move on to the next section, which is Your God's Financial Advisor, which was an interesting. It took me. I had to read that twice because I was like, huh. But now, just to kind of give a little bit of a back part of it. So Jonathan Pocaluta comes from Watermark, which is a church here in Dallas, and they are huge into community groups, like into life groups and small groups, and that's a huge thing. But one of kind of the requirements, one of the expectations of their small groups, especially for adults, is that they are open with everything, including finances. And so, and I know this because I've had some friends that have family members that have gone there, and it's been a source of tension at points, even at my church now, with groups with people that have come from there to our church, that you have to be an open book. You're expected to be an open book, and so before you make a financial decision, that you don't just talk with your spouse about it. You go before the life group, the small group, and you talk about that. And you talk about finances, and you talk about, what it would cost you and how much you have per month to spend. All that's open. So that's kind of where his mindset is kind of coming from when he talks about this. We'll talk about that in just a second. But what stands out to you as a part of this section, if anything? I didn't have much on this one.
For me, it's just something that stuck out to me and was a good reminder that I don't feel like I spend enough time in prayer when I am giving money, or spending money in general,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's, trying to find somewhere to donate the money, or if I'm making a big purchase, I don't feel like I include God in those conversations as much as I should.
yeah, I actually highlighted a few things in this section.
Good.
The first one was that last sentence on the first paragraph.
Yep.
True wisdom comes when we know what God's desire for us to do with His money.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to know that apart from spending time with Him, and that's kind of, I guess, that's related to what Brandon just said, prayer, and I think that's true for any part of your spiritual walk. You gotta spend time in the Word, spend time in prayer, things like that.
Yeah. What else did I do, Eric?
Um, Toward the end of one little sentence I just was a side sentence on page 77 toward the top. Americans don't like constraints, which
Yeah.
we want.
And
We want to
that
do
hit
what we want
close.
to do when we want to do it.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
That's so truly ingrained in our society. It's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Um, we're just not a trusting God society overall.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, I had the bottom of 77. How can I be a good steward of all of God's resources? That is a different mindset. And I think this is definitely a mindset struggle with greed and generosity. Where it says, if we believe all resources are God's, it shifts our values and shifts the way we spend.
Mm-hmm.
So just,
No, I think it's good.
and
It
then it
kind of
goes
gets
into,
into a question I want to ask, which was, how do you guys deal with, and again, a significant financial decision may be different in each house, but or like the number may be different. Now, like if a $500 purchase versus a $2,500 purchase or a $25,000 purchase, how do you? What is your process before this chapter? And again, you may make changes or whatever, but how do you go through that process? I kind of explained what Watermark does and what they expect is for like purchases over a couple $100. Like you're supposed to talk about that with your community group.
Mhm.
What do you guys do? What's kind of been your practice? And again, it may be healthy, it may be unhealthy. I'm not judging any part of it, but what's kind of been y'all's practice?
now we definitely me and my wife talk about it, and she trusts me to make those decisions as the main, uh, breadwinner of the house. But we were just recently forced to spend a
Right.
large purchase in a new car
Yep.
because her old car went down. So there really wasn't much choice. I mean, there was discussion of how high do we go, and
Yep.
what do we actually look for in this vehicle and things like that. But I think we ended up doing really well, and just the cars in general are so ridiculous these days.
Yeah. Right. Well, and it.
But I mean, the smaller things, it's the medium-sized purchases like the 2,000, that's usually comes in the form of trips for the family, from
Mhm.
bonuses or raises and things like that. When we have enough in the savings to still be comfortable, things like that.
Yeah, that's good. Now, okay, so this is another question, Brian. You can answer both these, but um, and you may not be paycheck to paycheck, which would be amazing, and I would be super excited for you. I know we certainly are paycheck to paycheck. Not is because we overspend at times too. But what? So when you look at that purchase of a car, right? Because that's a really good example of it's going to take you a couple of years to pay off minimum, right? Minimum 3 years or whatever. Do you look at it at the total number, or do you look at it as what does it add to our month to month expenses? Does that question make sense? So Eric, I'm
Yeah.
specifically coming to you first.
Oh, I would definitely say month to month.
Yeah.
Can I, after I pay the mortgage and all those other regular bills, can I fit this additional into what she's bringing in, or what
Yeah.
I'm bringing in into the other half of the month type paycheck? It's
Yeah.
definitely month to month, and yeah, we're paycheck to paycheck pretty
Yeah.
much right now because of that car.
Yep.
Took it
Yep. I understand that. What about you, Brandon?
took it away.
Yeah, same. I mean, yeah, I'm not dropping, 10, 20, 30, 40 K like in cash on a purchase like that.
Uh-huh.
Don't have that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you analyze the budget, make sure you have enough. I mean, for me, it's if I have to pick up some freelance to cover some of that extra, then I'll, figure that out and find it.
Yeah, yeah, that was us. I mean, and we obviously I got a car, and then we bought a house, and the only we when we talked about the house, the conversation was okay. I knew how much we had for the truck that I got, and we were making double payments, and all this sort of stuff is going great. And then we're like, okay, this house decision, like it has to come at it. The house cannot be worth more than this because we can't afford any higher. And then our house has to sell for this. And it all came down to that month to month, but it was all the okay, but that month to month can only be ultimately what that second truck payment is because that's what we can do it at. And then we have to agree that what we would normally pay off faster, we're paying off longer. Is that okay with my wife? Because she was going to be the next up for a vehicle, not me, obviously, because I got one. And so it's just all those discussions as a part of it. Now, what about you, Brandon? What's your process for big discussions? Who kind of leads that? How do you kind of work through that?
Yeah. I usually lead it, so I'm a huge spreadsheet guy. I make spreadsheets for everything, so
Nothing surprises me less than that right there. I bet they're colored too.
oh yeah, colored and yeah, everything, charts, graphs, all that kind of good stuff. So I probably overanalyze at
Mm-hmm.
times. But yeah, I mean that and discussions, but like I mentioned earlier, not enough of conversations with God goes into it.
Yeah.
That's definitely the weaker spot that I need to be better at.
Do you guys go outside of your spouse to have the conversation? And the part of this is
Mm.
I'm very curious how you guys view money because I think some of it's generationally. I think it's mostly the way that you were brought up. Are you private with money decisions like that, or are you open to talk to others with money and not like specifics? I'm talking like, listen, the car is going to cost me this much money. It's this much per month. This is how much we have extra. Like, how do you guys treat money in your house? I don't think there's
I
a right
wouldn't
or
say
wrong necessarily.
Okay, I'll definitely say that we keep it in the family. As far as like asking for advice or ideas or their experiences, like talking about parents and grandparents and even siblings.
Okay, so you would say parents, grandparents, and siblings. So your brother, that you're open there.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
no,
I don't know
that's all
about.
really good. No, that's great. I know people that do not tell anybody, so I'm very curious how like what your scope is of how far you reach out.
Brandon.
Probably,
Are you?
yeah, probably more on the private side, I think.
Hmm.
We don't really talk outside of our family, or like my family, my wife and kids sometimes if needed, but usually it's just me and my wife. Yeah. We
Yeah.
don't get too specific even with our own families.
Why? And I'm very curious. Why is it? And I'm gonna make an assumption. You tell me if it's right or wrong. Is it because you don't want other people to know where you are financially because they'll either judge you because you're ill spending your money, or they'll judge you because, oh, I didn't know you made that much money, um, or is it truly
That's
just
one, yeah,
a it's
sure.
it's not your business kind of thing?
I think it's just the way that maybe the way that I've grown up, it's never really
Hmm.
been a discussed topic, and I I don't know that I've intentionally held back as much as I just don't openly share it. If that makes
Hmm.
sense.
So if I ask, I'm not gonna ask you on stream, obviously. But and again we've talked like when you got your Jeep, it
Yeah,
was like, hey, what's your
yeah,
payment for that? Like, and you didn't hide that.
yeah.
I know y'all will know where I come on all this sort of stuff, but it's okay. So it's more for you because that's more of just the way you do it, not because you wouldn't be open to somebody else. You just
Right.
there's you never have been. But would you say you talk to your brother about it? You talk to your parents about it, or is it really pretty much you and Natalie is is the is the
Yeah,
primary?
usually it's just the two of us. I
Yeah,
mean, I may get some feedback with non-specific numbers and that kind of stuff of like
yeah.
trying to get a good deal on, like for instance, buying a car. I'll talk to my dad about that. My brother, my brother-in-law, who's all about cars, and just get the feedback on like the deal itself, but never on can we or can't we
Yeah.
type of conversations.
Okay, Eric, what about you to answer that question I asked earlier?
I mean, I would agree with that last statement that Brandon just said, and I would. I think if I had more, like if I felt wealthy, then I would probably tend to be more private within my
Yeah,
family.
yeah,
Or I don't know. That's just my first inclination. I would probably um, not reach out as much. Or it's funny. My father-in-law, he goes around and asks everybody what they make for a living.
uh huh.
It's I don't know why he does it.
Uh-huh.
He asks me every
That's
year.
me. That's
He
me.
asks me every year now. What are you making now, Eric?
Uh huh. Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, well, I know it surprises you. What would y'all say? I'm open or closed?
Close.
Uh,
You say
I think
closed?
you're closed on details.
Oh,
Mm,
see, I'm so the opposite. I will tell you everything. I don't care at
that's
all.
surprising.
Oh
But
yeah, not even
I'm
a little
also
bit.
not a nosy person, so I'm not going to dig deep into
Yeah.
your
Oh,
business.
see, I am a nosy person, but I'm a pastor, so it's okay. Yeah, which is interesting. Okay, and so okay, it was easier to be open. Just full transparency, it was easier to be open when I was a student pastor because I didn't make very much money.
Mm,
In my new role, again, I'll tell you all off stream. Like I don't care. Eric pays part of my salary with if he tithes to the church, so there's a reality to that too. But that I'm a little bit more guarded because I feel like I make enough now that I don't want people to judge me. That like, oh well, you make too much money for what you do. Now the reality is I still don't make a ton of money. Like I'm a pastor. I'm not near six figures. All right, in any way, shape, or form. So but so I'm a bit more guarded now than I was. But ultimately, I don't care because I feel as though I have justification for all the things that I've done or like the decisions that I've made. And we don't do things at my house like we eat out. That's literally that we don't go watch movies. We don't go on very many vacations that aren't paid for by somebody else. Like we don't go do things. So we eat out. That's our weakness is eating out. But I'm much more open and again, I think some of that's the pastoral part of it too is I want to be open so that people feel as though they can trust me. Now, I'm not going to be open from like a public forum and say, well, this is exactly what I make from the stage, kind of on a Sunday morning, and this is how much my car payment is or whatever. But like, I have no problem telling people that because it whatever it is, like it's my thing. And again, it goes back to there's not a lot of people that I'm close with that have a two income family. And we're a two income family all of a sudden
Mhm.
for the last, 2.5 years, a little over 2 years. That's a huge difference in what it allows us to do. But yeah, so okay, it's just it's a really interesting thing because I think so. If I'm gonna be honest, I think we should all be more open than we are, and not
Mhm.
necessarily open so that people will judge us, but open with a close group of people so that you feel as though number one, you're accountable to people, right? So that if Brandon comes in with a new $200,000 car, I'm gonna be like, did you win the lottery? Like, did you at least tithe
Yeah.
before you bought that? Um, or or whatever it might be. That there's a little bit of accountability. Like, oh, somebody's gonna see this and ask a question. That's not a bad thing as long as those people are the people that will encourage you in the same way and not judge you. I guess I'll kind of I've got a story here in this next section I'll tell about a guy that called me one time with this really crazy story, but I'll get that in a second. But okay, so it kind of leads us into this last section, which is the blessing of wealth, and um, the first thing that kind of stood out to me was kind of summing up the section was he said wealth truly becomes a blessing when we use the resources God has entrusted us as a way to bless those around us, which I think is a really good way to see it. And he talks in here about how it doesn't mean you can't have things. It doesn't mean that God doesn't give you wants. It doesn't mean your family can never go on a vacation. Like those are not things that I don't even think that God desires for you to not experience any of those things. Like the Bible talks about that, and it talks about in this chapter that God wants to bless you with good things for your hard labor. That there's a part of it with that, but that blessing isn't just yours. That part of the way that we should be see our wealth. The reality is we are all in the 1% of the world, all of us, because if you live in America, you are amongst the wealthiest people in the world. No matter what money you make, you are among the wealthiest people in the world. So we should see ourselves as wealthy. Therefore, we should find margin to bless others. So that was something that stood out to me. But what else stood out to you guys?
That's kind of goes along with that, with both of those last two sections, but talking about being good stewards of what God's given you. He was also talking, I forget where it was exactly, but relating that not just to money, but to everything that God's given you, whether that's relationships or material things. I was thinking like things like your house, like being a good steward of your house and your car, if you have mode of transportation, like trying to think of opportunities to use that, being a good steward of what that offers you, whether that's hosting somebody who needs somewhere to stay or adoption, like that kind of stuff, or
Mm-hmm.
being a good steward of your home and your family, and just looking at it from that perspective, I've never thought about the good stewardship part of things outside of usually it's financial.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think it doesn't have to be the big things, right? It's I have a whole bunch of tools, right, that I collected after the
Yeah.
hailstorm in Wiley, and I bought all these tools, and then I kind of got a bug, and I started buying more tools, and it like became this little bit of an addiction where I was like, oh, what's the next tool I could buy? But part of the thing that I've enjoyed is when somebody texts me and goes, hey, do you have that? I'm like, psh, how many of them do you want? Like, you want that and batteries? Like, I got that for sure. Of course, I got that. And so I've been able to. I feel like other people have used my tools as much as I've used them, and I really enjoy, and I truly do enjoy giving that to somebody to be able to use because I know it benefits them, and part of it feels like a justification for oh good, I'm glad I got this because somebody else gets to use it. But I think too some of it is that generosity mindset that what's mine, absolutely feel free to use it. I mean, what's the worst case? You're gonna break it. Like I'm not using it that often, anyways. Like obviously, I don't want that, but you know what I mean. Like there's just this idea of going, yeah, it's not meant to just sit on my shelf and look pretty. It's meant to be used, and so I want you to use it. So that's one of the ways I've tried to do what you said, Brandon, which is see the things that I have and allow people to do that, to use that and do that. What about you, Eric? What's something that stood out to you?
Yeah, a section that was funny to me is on top of page 80 when it's when you're talking about saying to yourself, "I don't need that. I don't need that," and then right above that, I wrote out, "We don't need that," because I find myself saying that every time that we go out as a family to the store. My wife and my kids saying, "Let me have that. Let me have that. We don't need that. We don't
Uh-huh.
need that."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But then I think about, is that coming from a place that, because I know we don't have the money for it because I feel poor, or if we did have some kind of wealth or more, would I
Right. Are you
say
just a
yes
stingy
more,
person?
or would I say yes more if we did have
Right.
the money? And
Right.
that would be, I think, if you're doing stuff, if you have more money, if you're doing stuff that you don't actually need, that is wasting God's
Mm-hmm.
resources.
Yeah. That's
So
really good. One, I think, and you actually brought up something to me that got my head, or that I was thinking about, that when I say no to my kids, part of that no needs to be an explanation of why, right? I say no all the time.
mm,
I'm just like you. You go, no, we don't need a toy. We have 400 toys. Like, we don't need another toy. Your grandparents buy you toys all the time. But to go, no, but here's why, and to talk about the generosity. Well, we can't give here because we're giving here instead. For them to be able to see, oh, the sacrifice for me not getting to have this thing is because my mom and dad are being generous over here. I've never thought about that connection, but as you were talking, Eric, that was what I was thinking, is going, what a better way to teach my kids about generosity than that. It kind of gets to a question, and I'm going to make an assumption. So if you don't do this, just do it, but you don't have to like feel guilty right now. But when you guys give to your church, right, whether it's a consistent tithe or whatever, do you give online? Do you write a check every week? Like, what is the process for you guys to give to your church?
I think lately it's been
Auto.
more online.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Is it auto drafted, or do you do it while you're sitting there like, oh crap, I gotta give money this month? You said
Ours is
auto, Brandon?
automatic. Yeah.
Eric?
Not automatic.
Not automatic.
I've
Listen, you're
yeah
you're that credit card guy that doesn't want his number stored in the internet
yeah
world.
because then John will pull it.
That's right. Um, okay, and the whole reason I ask, because we do the auto draft, and it's mostly because I forget straight up. Like I will go like 3 weeks, be like, oh crap, well that money's gone now, and I'll forget, to tithe or whatever. But one of the downsides of that is my kids don't get to see me. Like I did my parents and my grandparents put a check in the offering plate every Sunday or every 2 weeks or every
Yeah.
month, and so they don't see that generosity. Matter of fact, I don't even feel generous because I know it comes out at the first, the day one of every month, but I don't see it other than what I see on my bank account. So like I don't feel generous at times. And so I think that there's a challenge there in today's world. I don't have checks. Was trying to find a check the other day, and I'm like, I just ran out after 15 years of being married of my most recent checkbook, 15 years old. So like I had like my first apartment address on it. I just don't write checks. So for me, it's easier to give online. But I think part of the
I think it's
downside is,
Go ahead.
no, I just think part of the downside is I don't think about giving to the church, and my kids don't see me give to the church.
I think it's generational too. I mean, that's definitely a good challenge, is to do the checks so kids can learn and they can see you. I think it's generational too, because I see the older generation at our church writing checks
Yep. Yeah.
quite a bit, and I don't see any younger generation people doing
Uh-uh.
that. And I'm just assuming they're giving online or whatever. But I think it's generational how they were raised, like they did checks for everything,
Yeah.
and they're growing up.
Yeah.
in
My
their
mom still has a
generations.
checkbook that she literally balances at the end of every month. I'm like, you do know they do that online for you, like literally on whatever banking website you've got, they do that all that online for you. She just can't get away from it. So
Well, I never thought
and
about the kid aspect though, like showing your kids that action. Because I remember when I grew up in church, usually I'd be asking my grandma or something for some quarters to put in a little envelope so I could feel like
yeah,
I'm giving and make me feel all proud that I gave a dollar or
right,
something.
right,
But my kids never have that experience because we just don't do it that way anymore. So
right,
I haven't thought about that, just the act of being generous and the act of giving like that, how it was just natural for us to do that physically. But then, yeah, you do it online and you like you said, it's auto drafted. I don't even think about it. I forget that it's even a thing,
right,
which is good on the one hand because
right,
you're not tempted to pull it back. But then on the other hand, yeah, you don't feel generous when it does come
right,
out.
right. Well, and there's this, and again, it's some of this tactile, kind of feel of when I put that check in there. Even when I would give online, like so before I auto drafted, I would give online, and it was back pre-COVID when we would pass the offering plates, and when the offering plate would come by, I'd be like, oh crap, I didn't do it, and so I'd pull out my phone and I would do it on my phone right then, and and I would intentionally pray at that moment that I hit send. I go, God, would you use this money? Would you use this money to bless, whatever the prayer is at that moment? But I would pray over that money at that moment that God would use it. I think
Mm.
again, one of the downsides is I'm more generous now than I've ever been because it's auto drafted, so I'm more consistently generous. But I don't see it. I don't feel it. I don't get to. I feel like I miss a bit of the blessing of getting to do this with God and have this
Mm.
moment. Then and I've been thinking about how to do that and how to fix that, and I've thought about putting um, just a card, right? That and again, I'm on staff, like so it wouldn't bother anybody, but just to put a card to go this month's tithe or whatever, and just sign it or whatever, and let my kids put that in there, in to the boxes we head out. Like there's no money in it. It's just a card that is I could pray over that, which is a representation of my tithe every month, um, as a part of it. So, um, okay, so here's a question. So to get back to that story I was talking about earlier, can you guys? And I think this is part of what we can identify as greed. If someone were to come to you and tell you a story about how they got just a huge bonus, and we're talking like high five, six-figure bonus at work, what's your response to that? Would you roll your eyes? Would you give them a hug? Would you give them a hug but be cursing them underneath your breath? Like, what would your human response to be that, or would you celebrate them in that moment?
I would definitely feel jealousy first because, I know for a fact, people that I'm sure I work harder than, but they make ridiculous money
Uh huh.
for whatever they do, and it's like, why not me?
Uh huh. Uh huh.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Type thing. So yeah, definitely jealousy first, which is I know it's not good, but
Right.
yeah,
Right.
it's
Right. Right. That's the whole point of this, though, right? Honest answers.
Yeah.
yeah.
What about you, Brandon?
Same boat. And my initial reaction would be, oh, man, that's annoying. Like, why doesn't that happen to me? Or like the envy, your feelings and something like that. But one thing I am trying to get better about is celebrating other people's successes and not like disconnecting it from my own life. It's difficult to do when you do struggle with being jealous or have that envy in your heart, but trying to be better about, yeah, celebrating those successes and not comparing that
Mm-hmm.
to successes that I've had.
Yeah. I think it's really good. Not comparing that to successes I've had and to how God feels about me. Like, why, God, why
Mm,
did you bless them and not me? I need money.
mm,
I had a buddy of mine years ago. Doesn't go to our church anymore, but years ago, and he got a bonus, right? So he met his goal. He's a sales guy. Met his goal, and he got a bonus check of $80,000. Okay, 80,000. Guy's younger than me, no kids. I mean, doing really well. $80,000 bonus check, and he calls me and he goes and he says, I didn't know who else I could tell that wouldn't judge me or be upset about it, and so I knew I could call you and tell you. And I'm sitting here going, does he know that that's like literally double my salary almost? like the and in one day he just pulled in what is almost 2 years worth of salary for me at the time, and but at the same time there was this excitement, and it was a really good lesson that guy was going, but he felt like he could call you because you were going to be excited for him. And he needed to celebrate what God had done in his life. And this guy was beyond generous. He would walk, at one point, he walked up and just gave me $1,500 in cash and just goes, I just want you to know I love you and I appreciate all that you're doing in our church. Like, this guy was extremely generous as a person. And that made it a lot easier, right? But it was this idea to go, okay, I should, like you said, Brandon, I should be able to celebrate what God does in somebody else's life. I would be able to celebrate anything else. Somebody comes to faith, I celebrate it. Somebody gets healed of a sickness or cancer, I celebrate it. Somebody has a great win in their life, I celebrate it. So I should be able to do the same about money. It just sometimes is harder because it makes us insecure for whatever reason in our own lives. And so again, it was just something that God showed me in that moment to go, a generous heart is someone who celebrates the successes, financial successes of somebody else, even as hard as that is. So the other thing for me that I kind of wrote down is, I'm trying to think of where it came out of, but there's two things that we've started doing, and these are, again, I am generous. I'm more generous now than I have been in most of my life, and it's mostly come out of conviction that God has convicted me pretty hard over the last several years about my lack of generosity being a lack of trusting in Him. But that we this year for the first time, we're giving our tithe, and that's going really good, and we've been consistent. And this year we got the opportunity to go, okay, we have a little bit of flexibility. What would you say if we gave some money to a missionary and some friends of ours that are missionaries? And what if we gave just $100 a month? What do you think about that? It's not a huge amount of money. It's not anything crazy, but I just felt this call on our heart to go, okay, more generous, more generous. I know you've reached the point that you're tithing. That's good. That's a good check mark, but God wants more of me than that now. And so he kind of stirred on our heart that this was something we wanted to do. So we started doing that, and it's this wonderful thing. And then the other thing that is kind of more recent is I did a lot of freelance. It helped supply us when I wasn't making very much money and my wife wasn't working. And then in COVID, it all went away. Like $15,000 a year gone just in an instant, and never came back until this year. And it's come back in like a couple $100, like not much, but just some little things here and there. And one of the things that I felt like over the last couple of weeks that God's been really challenging me to go, I want more than 10%. Like I want 20% of that. And it's this mindset to go, like I'm so grateful that God has brought the opportunities to make a little bit of money outside of my job, and that I know how much that meant before. I know how much it hurt when we lost it. That now that it's back, I see it as such this incredible blessing to go, okay, God, I want to do more than 10%. I want to do 20, and just trying to gauge how that feels. But I guess part of that question is, how do you know you're being generous in your heart? And this is an individual question. There are church answers all day. How do you guys know that you're being generous in your heart? And where has God kind of challenged you with that over the last several years, maybe? Or at some point in your life?
I think for me personally, it's continuing to give when I really don't want to, and I really feel like it might be a little bit difficult. Kind
Yeah.
of like we've talked about before, like God doesn't necessarily call you to a 10% check mark. It's usually just, even if it's 2%, it's just give till you feel the impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I would say the same thing. I mean, I can't think of good answer to that question, but Brandon made some good points. I would say, if it hurts, it's I think it's a start. So.
Right. Well, it goes back to me the whole purpose, right? Why does God call us to give? It's all God's money, anyways, right? So He didn't need us to give Him money. Why does He call us to do it? It's solely to trust, right? It's the reason that the Israelites, they planted for 6 years, and on the seventh year, they were not allowed to plant anything. Why? It wasn't that God didn't trust them. It wasn't that God couldn't provide for them that seventh year. It was solely that they would learn and remember that the only person that they needed to trust was God. And that if they trusted Him, He would provide for them, and that would help keep them on track to not trust in themselves and in their own resources and in their own abilities to take care of themselves. And for me, that's something I've really tried, which again is at the root of what both of y'all are saying, to kind of dial in on is it's all about trusting God. Do I trust God enough to do that? And so I've tried to be really sensitive to go, okay, God, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? Whether it's a big purchase or it's a giving thing, what do you want me to do? And when I'm uncomfortable, I let Him know, but that ultimately my job is to trust and my job is to obey and then let Him do it. And I could give you stories of how God has come through with us. And I think a huge part of that is that as we have become more generous, more consistent in our generosity, that God has blessed that trust that we're putting in Him by always allowing things to come through when we need them to come through, even if we don't, that is so out of left field that we didn't see it coming, kind of thing. Does that make sense? I think that's something that He's taught me a lot over the last 4 or 5 years. Is it is truly a representation of how much I trust Him by how generous I am. And again, like you said, Brandon, it doesn't have to mean I have to hit a certain percentage, because sometimes that percentage isn't high enough. I think that's something He's teaching me right now, is that no, I want more of you than just this right now. And it may not always be that way, but I want more of you. And sometimes it's, I want more of you, but that number's way lower. And that's okay too. It's what is the Holy Spirit doing in your heart to give? There have been times where we gave $120 a month. That was all we could give of our tithe. And man, I gave that every month, and I felt guilty at first. And I was like, no, this is what we're giving. And this feels, I'm having to trust God with this much money, even though it wasn't anywhere close to 10%. This is what I'm having to trust God with. So, all right. Anything else standing out to y'all?
No, that's kind of all I had highlighted, and you made some good points. So
cool. All right. So I'm going to finish off with this then. It says the goal, he says on page 80, the goal is that we as Christians would be the most generous people the world has ever known. One of the things I talk about a lot these days is that our job as Christians is to point people to God, right? That we are holy and set apart from the world. That's the whole kind of thing of why we don't immediately get taken to heaven when we put our faith in Jesus, is that God desires to use us to show the world who He is and how He loves. And one of the best ways we can do that is to be generous people, because generosity is the opposite of the world. And to be generous people is one of the best ways that we can show people who God is. So cool. All right, gentlemen, I appreciate you. We'll be back next week with our next chapter, which is apathy and diligence. Oh, that one's gonna hurt. I think that one's gonna hurt me a bit. So okay, good. All right. Well, we'll be back next week with apathy and diligence. Until then, see ya. All right.